Today we're talking about one of my favorite topics, and that is seeds. Let's go. Hey friends, it's Kendall, your joyful farmer. I'm here today with my seeds and my cup of tea, and I'm going to share with you my favorite varieties to grow in the vegetable garden. I'm also going to share with you some of the new ones that I'm growing this year and update you on some of the ones that I grew last year that I may or may not grow again this year.
Pausing here to let you know how I have decided upon this list. Over the years, I've sought out the plants that are the most productive and vigorous. I also look for pest resistance, disease resistance, and heat resistance. And I also find what brings me joy. Many of these I grow just because they're fun. I love unusual colors, hard to find varieties, and of course there are some new ones on the list this year as well. I'm always excited about trying new things. And if you make it to the end, I'll also share with you some of my favorite herbs, tea plants, and beneficial flowers for the vegetable garden.
I could literally talk about seeds all day, so I'm going to try not to spend too much time on each variety, but I really want to share with you why they're my favorite or why I decided to try them this year. And just to give you some context, we're here in North Texas growing in zone 8A, 8B, and we have really long hot summers. We have a short spring, a short fall, and a long hot summer in between the two. I'm going to try to share these in alphabetical order, and I'll also put the name of the type of seed up on the screen so that if you need to come back and reference a certain seed, you can do that. First is bush beans. I think I've finally settled on a favorite variety of bush beans for just a standard green bush bean, and that is the Provider bush bean. I grew them last year, and they were super vigorous plants, very quick to grow and produce, and they produced buckets of bush beans for us. They had a couple of really big flushes of beans before they finished in the heat of the summer. I also love growing dragon tongue beans. They have this beautiful kind of white color with purple striping, and the purple striping really appears the most when the sun is shining down on them. So that really nice, beautiful color is what I grow them for. Just the novelty of it is super fun. And then when you cook those beans, they actually turn white. So the purple disappears and they turn white. They're kind of magical and fun, and my kids like them. So I do like to grow dragon tongue bush beans. I'm trying a new variety this year that's new to me, and it's called the Maxibel haricot. The reason I chose this variety is the beans are really, really thin, and it looked like it produced a large quantity of them at once. So I'd really like to try those and see if we like those this year. Another bush bean I love is called the amethyst bush bean, and the reason I love it is for the purple color. I love purple vegetables. You're going to notice that as sort of a theme in a lot of my vegetables is I love those unusual colors or colors that have more anthocyanins in them and just a little bit of extra nutrition that we can enjoy the color and a little bit of extra nutrients. For pole beans, I love the Kentucky Wonder pole bean. Those always do well, and they produce a little bit of beans throughout the course of the spring and summer rather than bush beans that produce a large flush at once. So Kentucky Wonder is a really good pole bean. I also love to grow long beans. Long beans are more heat tolerant and more drought tolerant than bush beans. You can actually start them a little bit later. I like to direct sow noodle beans or long beans directly in the soil when the soil's reached about 65 degrees Fahrenheit, when the days really start to warm up a couple of weeks after the last frost. And they're just so magical. They'll climb up a trellis and these long noodle beans will hang down. I like the red noodle bean as well as the yard long beans that are green, and they're really extra delicious if you pick them while they were still a little bit on the short side. So for red noodle beans, that'd be a foot long. That's kind of a good, nice tender size to pick them, or a little bit smaller than a foot. And then for the yard long beans, they will grow 3 feet if you let them. But if you pick them a little bit on the smaller side, more like 18 inches, they're a little more tender and a little bit more palatable to some people that don't like the tough chewiness of the noodle beans when they get a little bit more mature. But long beans are extremely drought tolerant. I sometimes will just sow them in the spring, watch them come up, and then leave them alone after that. I will not even have to water them, and they'll just keep producing throughout the summer. One thing to know about noodle beans or long beans is that For some reason, wasps are very attracted to the flowers on them. So if you have an allergy to wasps, you might not want to have them in your garden. And just watch out for the wasps when you're picking the noodle beans. They won't really generally bother you when you're picking them unless you accidentally go to grab one. Ask me how I know. Next is beets. I love to grow beets, and there are a few that I always tend to grow. If I had to choose one beet to grow from now through the rest of my life, it would be golden beets. I love Detroit golden beets or any golden colored beet. They just have a milder, sweeter flavor than the darker red ones. And anybody who detests beets or really doesn't like beets, you can get them to be a little bit more open to them if you get them to try the golden ones. For a standard dark red beet, I like the Detroit dark red beet. There's also the red bull beet, which is kind of a cool one because it's an extra dark red color and the leaves are also beautiful. They're a darker red as well. And there's also the Chioggia beet. That one's really fun because it's got red and white stripes. It's got a milder flavor. And then the red stripes actually disappear when you cook them. Just a fun little novelty thing. One beet that's new to me this year that I'm gonna try are sugar beets. I hear that you can process them and have your own sugar to store. So I'm gonna give that a try and see how it goes. And any vegetable that has sugar in the name, I figure my kids might be more likely to eat it. Next is cabbages. I always will grow the early Jersey cabbage. That's kind of my standard go-to. The reason I like that one is it has a shorter days to maturity than a lot of cabbages, and sometimes our spring can be really short and heat can set in kind of quickly. And that early Jersey will be ready to harvest sooner than some of the other varieties. So I like that one. I'm also currently growing the Catarina cabbage. They're behind me. There's a few of them. But I'm trying that one because it had a much shorter days to maturity than even the early Jersey. It was supposed to have a 45 days to maturity on it. And it's been overwintering in the high tunnel, so it's taken a lot longer than 45 days because the days have been shorter. But I'm looking forward to having those Catarina cabbages, and I think they're going to be good. They look good. The red cabbage that I like to grow is called red acre cabbage. It's a really good one. Next is cauliflower. I have a new favorite when it comes to cauliflower. It's done really well growing. It's actually right here next to me, but I've grown it over the winter in the high tunnel this year, and I finally have the most beautiful heads of cauliflower from it, and that is the graffiti cauliflower. It's a hybrid from Haas, I believe, but it has the brightest purple heads. The starts did really well germinating and growing, and they've done very well in here in the high tunnel. Even through some pretty serious freezes, they've done quite well. So graffiti cauliflower is a good one. Next is carrot. I love the Danvers carrots. They're just a standard orange carrot and a very standard variety that's been around for ages. They germinate well, they grow well, they taste really good, just a really good solid orange standard carrot. I also absolutely love purple carrots. There are a couple of different ones that I like. There is the Purple Sun, which has a purple skin on the outside and kind of a red or red-orange inside. Those are really beautiful. And there's a couple that are very similar. There's one called the Cosmic Purple and Purple Dragon. Those are all three very similar. They have a really beautiful color to them, and when I took these to market to sell, they absolutely flew off of the tables, and they are super sweet and delicious carrots. There's also the Black Nebula carrot. I had saved some seeds, so it's one that I'm going to reintroduce to my garden and grow again this year. I love the Black Nebula because the color is just so dark. It's full of anthocyanins, and it has this beautiful little nebula, sort of brand new baby galaxy when you cut into it. There's this little unique white design in every carrot, so it's a really cool one to grow. Next is cucumber. I love growing cucumbers. There are several varieties that I've found that work really well in our climate where we are. The first one is Armenian cucumber. Armenian cucumbers aren't really a true cucumber. They're more in the melon family and related to melons, but they make an excellent cucumber. There are some different varieties of Armenian cucumbers. There is the striped Armenian, as well as some lighter green Armenian cucumbers. Any of them are really, really delicious. Oh, hey, Luke. He's always got to find me. So funny. So Armenian cucumbers, they are so good. Some of them, there's a striped Armenian cucumber that has a little bit more of a fuzz on the skin, which is sometimes a texture that you can kind of brush off that some people don't love. And then there are the more wrinkly Armenian cucumbers. Those tend to have less of that fuzz. Luke's knocking over the camera today. Are you feisty? So Armenian cucumbers, though, are amazing. They're good for pickling. They're amazing fresh. They're just a really great cucumber. Then as far as standard cucumbers go, there's a few that I really like. The national pickling cucumber is a really easy one to find, and it's a really good standard variety that's been around for ages. There's also the silver slicer cucumber. It's a white cucumber, but it is easily one of the most delicious cucumbers I've ever had. It's super crisp. It's so fresh tasting, and it's on the mild but sweet side. It's just really delicious for a cucumber. And then there are a couple that perform really well for me, and I tried them for the first time last year, and I loved them. One is the Excelsior cucumber. It is one that is gynoecious and parthenocarpic, which means that it produces all female flowers and it's self-pollinating. So it doesn't require pollinators. It did really well in the high tunnel out here. But the Excelsior cucumber produced constantly so many cucumbers, and they had a really nice texture and flavor. Really great cucumbers. And the other I tried for the first time last year that did extremely well is the H19 Little Leaf Cucumber. It's a hybrid from Johnny's as well, and it did an incredible job in a very small space. So it was a very compact plant, but produced these perfect little cucumbers, about 4 to 5 inches long for these smaller cucumbers, but they were perfect for eating fresh or also for pickling. They did really well. So if you need a plant that's a smaller plant, it's a dwarf plant that will produce really well. Next, let's talk about eggplant. We don't eat a ton of eggplant in my house, but when we do, we'll eat it in like an eggplant parmesan type of form. And one of the eggplants I really like to grow is called ping tongue. It has these nice long eggplants that are more narrow, and it makes them easier to just slice up and use on a kind of a smaller scale than the really big round discs of eggplant. So it might be one that you want to try. I also like the Casper eggplant, which is white, and it's just a really pretty fun one to grow if you do like eggplant. It's a good one. Next is ground cherries. Ground cherries are one of our favorite snacks around here. They're a super sweet little fruit that are related to tomatillo. They're nightshade. They love the heat, so they grow really well in our Texas summers. And there are some ground cherries that are on the smaller side and some that are on the larger side. The one that I tried this last year was called pineapple tomatillo, and it was one that was a little bit on the larger side. Some of the fruits were as big as 1.5 inches across, which is a pretty big ground cherry. Another good variety is called Aunt Molly's ground cherry. I've really never met a ground cherry I didn't like. Next is kale. So there are a few different types of kale that I like to grow. One is dino kale or lacinato kale. Last year I grew a variety called Black Magic for the first time, and it did really well. It's still, some of the plants are still going here in the high tunnel, but it has leaves that are on the narrow side, so a little bit thinner leaves, but more uniform leaves in size. There's also blue curly kale. I don't currently have any growing, but I will start some for the spring because I love blue curly kale for kale chips especially. But they have little curly edges, kind of a fringe on the edge of their leaves. And then there's scarlet kale. So there's some of it back there behind me. But scarlet kale is the same shape of leaf. It's got those little frills on the edges and the same kind of texture as the blue curly kale, but it's purple. It's this really rich, dark purple. It's a little bit harder to get to germinate. Sometimes the germination rates are low on them, but I really don't care. It's a purple kale and it's beautiful and delicious and good for me. Next is kohlrabi. There are a couple of kohlrabi varieties that I've grown and have worked well. There's the purple Vienna and the white Vienna. Both of those have done well. Next, let's talk about lettuces. I love all sorts of lettuces. There's one that I really prefer as a romaine style lettuce, and that is the Paris Cos. It's just a really good, solid romaine style lettuce. And then there is the Merlot lettuce. That's a red one that's softer and a little bit wavier. I also love bib style lettuces. So if you like those beautiful little perfect looking round heads of lettuce that you can pick off perfect little round leaves, the butter crunch or bib style lettuce is really delicious as well. Oh, for melons, I do like the Hale's Best for cantaloupe. It's just a really good standard variety of cantaloupe that's really productive and always a good sweet one. There's the Kajari melon, which is a green meated melon that's a muskmelon, and it's a really, really sweet one. I found that the Kajari melon gets ravaged by cucumber beetles, so I skipped growing it last year in hopes that our cucumber beetle population would go down, and I think it has, so I may reintroduce some Kajari melon this year. Then there's the Madhu Ross melon. It's one that's probably my son's favorite. He loves it. It's a super sweet, smaller melon that's more of a cantaloupe flavor because it's orange, but it's super duper sweet and juicy. And a couple of new ones I'm gonna try this year are the Kiku chrysanthemum. The Kiku chrysanthemum. I think I'm saying that right. Kiku chrysanthemum melon. Chrysanthemum. But that one's supposed to be mild and really sweet. It had a lot of stars in the reviews on Baker Creek, I think it was. So I thought I'd give that one a try. And then I'm gonna try the Minnesota midget melon, which is a smaller, more personal sized cantaloupe, and see how that one grows. It's supposed to be a more compact plant as well. So we'll see how that one grows and does and produces. Next, let's talk about okra. I absolutely love to grow okra just because it is so stinking easy to grow here in the southern US. It loves heat and it doesn't mind the fact that it doesn't rain for a couple of months here where we are. So okra is a beautiful plant, and I especially love red burgundy okra because it's beautiful, but it's also tasty. The pods you can let grow probably to about 5 inches before they'll start getting tough, and you just harvest those every day and you'll have some really delicious okra. I also like Hill Country Red. That's more of a short, stumpy okra, but it's a really good one as well. And then just the more standard Clemson spineless okra. It's just a really solid producing okra. It's been around forever and it's a good one. Next is peas. I don't grow a lot of English peas, but I do grow snap peas. So a couple of varieties of snap peas that I really like. The sugar snap and the sugar and snap pea are both really tender, really productive, just really good standard varieties of snap pea. And then you have the sugar magnolia or spring blush. Either of those, if you can find them, have these beautiful little pink or purple blooms before they produce the little snap pea. And then the peas themselves have a nice little pink blush or purple blush on them. And they're just beautiful plants, really fun to grow just for the color of them. So let's talk about peppers. We don't eat a ton of hot peppers in my house, but some of the peppers that I tend to grow are a jalapeno. So I'll use either an early jalapeno, or last year we grew the Tam mild jalapeno, and those were really good sized, larger jalapeno. There is the Jimmy Nardello. That is a long red sweet pepper that I love to use in cooking. That's one that I will saute or blister on the stove and add as flavor to scrambled eggs, to vegetables. Just on its own, it's really delicious. So Jimmy Nardello has always got a place in my garden. For bell peppers this year, I'm going to try the Early Sensation. It's a yellow bell pepper from Haas. I haven't really found any other bell peppers that do extremely well for me, so I'm hoping that trying one that's a hybrid will give me a little bit more production on my bell peppers. And I love the idea of a yellow sweet bell pepper as well. And this year I'm going to try a couple that I haven't grown before. There's one called the jalapeno, which is a jalapeno that has no heat, apparently. I sometimes do like the flavor of jalapeno, but not so much the heat. So we'll give those a try, especially for when we stuff them with cream cheese and wrap them in bacon and throw them on the grill. I think that would be really good for especially the kids that can't handle a lot of heat. I think the jalapeno will be a really good option. And then there's something called the habanada, which is a habanero without the heat. So we can try some of that habanero flavor, especially in things like jams and jellies, that I think that'll be really delicious flavor without having that kick. So maybe hopefully we can incorporate some of those peppers that have less heat in them. And then my dad grows a whole bunch of super hot peppers. So he has all sorts of varieties he's grown over the years. That's his hobby. And so I'll put a list on the screen of his top 10 that he likes to grow. So if you're interested in super hot peppers, there's a list for you. Next, let's talk about potatoes. I personally think potatoes are really fun to grow. I will just purchase potatoes mostly from the grocery store, and I'll try and get the organic ones that I know haven't been sprayed with anything, any growth inhibitors, and I will cut those potatoes up so that there's 1 to 3 eyes on each piece of potato. I'll let the cut areas heal over, kind of dry out and scab over for a few days to a week, and then I'll plant those pieces out in the ground, maybe 6 to 12 inches apart, and I'll let them grow. They'll grow their nice bushy potato bush, and then underneath the ground they'll develop more potatoes. It's so much fun to harvest potatoes, just going out there and digging them out of the soil. It's kind of like a treasure hunt. But I like the blue Adirondack potatoes. They're a really fun variety to grow just because of the color. I will usually find those at our local farm supply store. And then I also really like Gold Yukon. So those are probably my 2 favorite potato varieties. Now, if you are finding value in this content, I would really appreciate it if you would consider liking, subscribing, or sharing it with a friend or someone who can benefit from it so that we can continue to help more people find joy in growing. Radishes. Radishes are fun to grow because they're such a quick turnaround crop. I like the French breakfast radish for one that's just a standard kind of typical looking radish. Then I really do like something called watermelon radish. It's one that if you cut it, it's green on the outside, but then if you cut it open, it's pink on the inside. So it's really a fun one, especially to get the kids interested in radishes. Doesn't taste like watermelon, it tastes like radish, but it's a really fun one. And then there's the Easter basket radish mix from Baker Creek. This one's also just a good little fun variety of lots of colors, just lots of little surprise varieties in this mix as well. And when I purchased this seed packet, it had a ton of seeds in it. It says minimum of 750 seeds. So Baker Creek can sometimes be very generous with the amount of seeds that they give you. I have a video where I actually compared the cost of several different seed retailers and counted the quantity of seeds that they actually send you versus what they advertise on the packaging, and just really broke down a cost comparison as well as a comparison of the germination rates and things like that. So if you're interested, I'll link that video in the description below. Luke's back. He wants to talk about spinach. So next is spinach. I like the Bloomsdale long-standing spinach, especially in our warmer climate, because I find that it will go a little bit longer into the spring and summer months before it bolts and goes to seed. That's the Bloomsdale long-standing. And then I also like a couple of unexpected varieties of spinach. There is one called New Zealand spinach. This one is more heat tolerant, so this one will really grow through our summer months, and it's similar enough to spinach that I find that we can get away with this one. And then there's also something called Orach. I grew purple Orach for the first time last year. In the cut flower world, it's also called Atriplex, but Orach is super cold tolerant, just like other spinaches are, but it's not exactly a spinach, but it behaves like a spinach, so I put it in this category. But Orach is beautiful. I grew the purple variety this last year, and it had the most beautiful color. It was really rich in antioxidants, and the chickens enjoyed it as well. But it's just a really nutrient-dense purple vegetable that's very cold tolerant and well worth growing if you want to try growing that through the winter or very, very early spring. One other spinach I'll throw in here that I really like to grow is Malabar spinach. Malabar spinach is not exactly in the spinach family either, but it is a vining spinach, so it behaves in a really cool way. It will grow up a trellis very, very easily. It will climb. And the leaves have this kind of almost gelatinous texture to them. I think they're supposed to be really good for your digestive system because of that. It's very, very drought tolerant. So those seeds will volunteer in the garden, or I'll sow them and they won't need to be watered the entire season. And that's actually pretty remarkable, seeing as here in North Texas, the temperatures are in the triple digits throughout the summer, and it just grows through them like a champ. There are little berries on the Malabar spinach that you can use for dyes and use as a coloring agent. They're really pretty berries, but when you see those berries, that also means that they've gone to seed, and so those seeds will spread everywhere. The birds do like to eat the berries, so you'll likely find Malabar spinach in your garden forever if you choose to grow it. But it's such a beautiful plant. It's so majestic looking and a fun one to grow. I honestly don't eat Malabar spinach so much as I just look at it because it's beautiful. Next, let's talk about summer squash. So summer squash that I like to grow, for yellow squash, there is a slick pick, which is a yellow squash, as well as the early yellow straight neck squash. I think that's what it's called, but it's an earlier producing yellow squash that's a really good standard kind of straight neck variety as opposed to the crook neck varieties. There's also the scallop squash. I love growing yellow or white scallop squash. The plants are a little bit more compact and they produce lots of different little scallop shaped squashes. They're round, and so they're really fun to just slice up and throw on the grill, or you can cut them up like you would a typical squash and saute it and cook it, things like that. But they're really delicious, scallop squash are. One new yellow squash that I'm trying this year is called Tempest. It's a hybrid from Johnny's, and the reason I picked this one is that it's supposed to have a really rich, nutty flavor for a yellow squash. It's supposed to be a really good culinary squash. I also chose it because it says that it features an open habit and softer spines for harvest. One of my least favorite things about harvesting squash or zucchini is reaching into the plants and getting scratched up on my arms from all of the spines that are in the plants. So I'm going to give this one a try and see if it's any easier to harvest from this year. And then for zucchini, there's just the standard dark green zucchini. I did try one last year called Dunja. It's a variety that claimed to need less pollination than zucchini typically do. So I did try that one here in the high tunnel, and I didn't pollinate it by hand enough to get a lot of production off of it, but it started to produce a lot of zucchini fruit. So I might try that one out in the big garden this year rather than here in the high tunnel where the pollinators weren't able to get in, and see if that one does better. Also for zucchini, I really like a round zucchini. They're kind of like scallop squash in that there's a little bit more compact plants and the zucchini is actually a sphere. There's also, I think Haas sells one that's called 8 ball, but you can just get one called round zucchini, And those are so fun to grow and fun to eat, and also slice up and throw these big discs on the grill. Just a different shaped zucchini and fun to grow and eat. Swiss chard. We don't eat a whole lot of Swiss chard in my house, but I will grow a rainbow Swiss chard. I think it's also called 5-color silver beet, something like that, but they have beautiful colors to them, and that one is a fun one to grow. For winter squash and pumpkins, I do like to grow a butternut squash. Just the Waltham butternut squash is good. Or there's one that's also called butterbush that is a smaller, more compact variety. The plants are smaller and the little butternut squash is smaller as well. But those are really fun to grow. For pumpkins, I really like the fairy tale and Jarradale pumpkins for more decorative pumpkins, as well as the small white pumpkins called the Casperita pumpkins. Those are really fun. I like to grow just fun varieties of pumpkins that are more decorative. And then for a pie pumpkin, the sugar pie pumpkin is really good. And I am still looking for a winter squash that has a long shelf life and that I can kind of store up a good amount of it over the winter. I'm going to try the sweet dumpling squash this year from MIgardener. It looks really good and it's supposed to have a good shelf life. So we'll see how that one does. And then also for winter squash, I do like spaghetti squash. There was a Little Wonder spaghetti squash that I grew a couple of years ago that the squash was on a little bit on the smaller side, but it had a really great storage life through the winter. And then also as far as vining, gourds, and squashes and things, I love to grow loofah. Loofah is a really fun drought-tolerant, heat-resistant plant that will grow throughout the whole summer here in North Texas, and then it will produce loofahs in the fall, and you can dry them and harvest your own sponges from them, which is really cool. And then there is the birdhouse gourd. I love to grow that one, and we've made little decorative birdhouses out of that one before. For food, I like to grow something called gagutsa squash. If you grow one plant of gagutsa squash, you will have so much. It is super productive, very heat and pest resistant. The squash vine borers and squash bugs don't bother it at all. And it will produce these kind of baseball bat sized squashes that you can peel, dice up, scoop the seeds out, and use the meat in especially like tomato-based sauces and stews and soups. One that I'm going to try that's new to me this year that I can't believe I haven't tried before is called tromboncino squash or rampicante squash. I've just never gotten my hand on some seeds, and my friend gave me some, so I'm going to try them. They are a vining plant, but they're supposed to be much more resistant to squash bugs and squash vine borers. We'll see how that goes. And they're supposed to taste really good as well. So I'm going to try those out this year. I'm hoping that they'll be a winner. Tomatillo. Tomatillos you do have to grow in pairs. They need at least 2 plants in order to properly pollinate one another. And my favorite tomatillo to grow is the purple tomatillo. Tomatillos do make great salsa. Any just green tomatillo is good as well. But the purple tomatillos, you're probably not surprised. Those would be my first choice. It's starting to get cold out here, so Luke's gonna keep me warm, I guess. Let's talk about tomatoes. I love growing all different varieties of tomatoes. There are some that I absolutely can't live without. The ones that I can't live without would be Dr. Weish's or Dr. Witchy's. That is probably my #1 tomato. A couple of years ago, I grew 7 or 8 different types of big, fat, yellow and orange tomatoes to test and see how they did in our climate. And overall, the other tomatoes, Dr. Weish's, Dr. Witchy's, it was just far and above the best producer. Throughout the heat, it still continued to produce a little bit, and their flavor profile is just light, not very acidic, very fruity, just sweet, delicious. Even my husband, who used to not like to eat tomatoes apart from salsas or on a burger or whatever, he'll even eat a tomato sandwich. That's just a big fat Dr. Witchy's tomato slice. They're so yummy and so good and such a great producer. That's the only yellow tomato I'll ever need again. Last year I tried a variety called Harvest Moon. It is a hybrid from Johnny's, and I believe they still sell it. I have a couple of seeds left from last year that I'll start for this year, but it is a hybrid, and I found that it produced two not super large, but good sized slicer tomatoes that were yellow and kind of similar to a Dr. Weish's tomato as far as the flavor profile goes. But Harvest Moon was a really good one, a really good producer. Didn't seem affected by any sort of disease or insects at all. Another tomato I can't live without is Black Krim. It is a super productive tomato as well. Some of the tomatoes that are darker like Black Krim I've found to be less productive, especially as the heat sets on here in North Texas. But Black Krim seems to keep going fairly well, and it produces a large number of tomatoes at the start. It's a really good, tasty, darker tomato. It's more balanced, but very sweet for a darker tomato. Some others that are kind of runners up for me as far as big fruity tomatoes are Big Rainbow and the German Striped. Those both also make huge tomatoes. So if you're interested in a really big tomato that's got a pretty red striping or red color going through the fruit, those are really good ones. I also love any Brandywine tomato, and here in North Texas we have to get those Brandywines started a little bit sooner so that they'll produce, because they quit producing a little bit quicker when our heat sets on. But the Brandywine Black, Brandywine Pink, Brandywine Red, any of those I really enjoy. A new one I'm trying this year I saw at MIgardener. It's called Vintage Wine, and it has this beautiful red and orange striping, and it just looked like a really good one to try. So I'm gonna try Vintage Wine this year. Another couple of tomatoes I really liked last year that I'll still have probably one plant of each this year is the persimmon tomato. The persimmon tomato was very kind of had just a mango taste to it and had a little bit of peach fuzz on it. A really delicious, fruity, meaty tomato. And then I also will have one plant probably of the hillbilly tomato, just because the size of those tomatoes was absolutely massive. I think if I pruned one really well and cared for it really well, I could probably get a 2.5-pound tomato, a 3-pound tomato off of that plant, because they are huge tomatoes. Another variety that I didn't grow last year, but I've grown in years past, is called the white Tomatillos tomato. And I didn't realize how much I missed these white tomatoes. They were the most productive tomato in my garden a few years ago, and I'm not sure why I stopped growing them, but I'm going to pick them up and grow them again because they're so productive and they're such a light flavor that really anybody who doesn't like tomatoes, you probably could fool into thinking it's some sort of fruit or something because they're just that mild and sweet. And then another I'm going to grow this year is the Early Girl tomato. I didn't grow it last year, but I've grown it in years past, and it's such a productive tomato. The one I'm growing is a determinate or bush style tomato, and it will produce a lot of tomatoes at once. And it produces early on, so it'll be one of the first ones to produce. Makes a nice red slicer tomato, and it'll be a really good one. That's just a standard red, more acidic flavored tomato. And then one other one that I'm gonna grow that I've heard is a really good one is this Bella Rosa tomato from Haas. I've heard that it's very disease resistant. It's one that does really well in heat and in warmer climates. So I'm gonna give this one a try this year. Another tomato that I'm growing as a repeat this year is called Moscovich. The Moscovich plants are heirlooms, but they're supposed to be more cold tolerant than most tomatoes, which is not a typical tomato trait. I did find that those Moscovich plants, after there was a freeze in the high tunnel, those plants seemed to survive or bounce back a little bit more quickly than the other plants that were in the tunnel. So what I'm going to try this next year is I'm going to try to start those Moskvich tomatoes even sooner and get them planted out before our last frost in the spring. So I'll get them out here in the high tunnel pretty early just to see how early I can get tomatoes this year. And the Moskvich tomatoes were a nice red kind of salad to medium-sized slicer tomato. They had a really nice flavor for a red tomato and were good, so they're worth trying again. For paste tomatoes, I really like Amish paste tomatoes, and the reason I like those is that they're a larger sized paste tomato. When you slice into them, they are majority meat, they have very few seeds, and they're a little bit easier to process and peel when it comes to sauce making than the Romas or the San Marzanos that are a little bit smaller. All of those plants, the Amish paste, the Roma, and the San Marzano, are all really productive and they make a large amount of tomatoes, but I have found that the Amish paste are a little bit easier to process, so I do prefer those with the Romas and San Marzanos at a close second. And then for cherry tomatoes, I'm gonna grow the black cherry tomato. It's one that I always will grow. It's just a sweet, dark cherry tomato that's really productive. It does well in our heat, and I just love it. It's just a delicious cherry tomato. So black cherry, as well as the sun gold tomatoes. Last year I grew Torangina, which is that same color and flavor as the sun gold, but they've discontinued those Torangina seeds. I saved some of the Torangina seeds. However, they're hybrid seeds, so I will try and grow some of the Toranginas just to see what kind of plant I get. I don't think it'll be any kind of crazy monstrosity of a plant, but I'll try and grow one and see what happens. But I also have some of those sun gold seeds, which are super productive in our heat. Easily, probably the tomato that produced into the summer the longest last year outside of the high tunnel. So there were tomatoes on that plant through July and August. I think it stopped for just a short time in August, setting new blooms, but then it picked up again in September and started producing even more of those little yellow gold tomatoes. And they're just so sugary sweet and so delicious. And other people seem to love the sun gold tomatoes too. Anytime I've given somebody a plant, they've always been really happy with those little yellow gold tomatoes. And people look forward to getting them again. At farmers markets when I bring them, they're just always a really big hit. So sun gold is a cherry tomato I'll have forever. Last year I grew centiflora tomatoes out here in the high tunnel as my red cherry tomato. I do like those plants. They have really large clusters of blooms, just dozens and dozens of blooms on one cluster. But I did find here in the high tunnel, maybe it was the lack of wind or the lack of pollinators in here, but I did find that the centiflora tomatoes had a little bit of trouble with pollination. So I'm gonna try the tidy treats in here just because they'll be more dwarf, easier to train up the trellis, and kind of easier to tame. And we'll give them a try here in the high tunnel and see how they do for a red cherry tomato. I also really love the rose tomato, so I'll grow some of those. The pinker tomatoes have a really unique flavor as well. And I also ordered some seeds, I think from MIgardener, that are a German pink tomato. Those are a little bit larger size, and I'm gonna give those a try this year. I'd really like a larger pink tomato to kind of round out my tomato sandwiches. I like to stack really fat pieces of tomato of different colors on my tomato sandwiches, kind of make a rainbow tomato sandwich. It's getting cold out here. Can you tell I'm shivering? And just a couple more tomatoes I'm excited about growing this year. I am gonna fill a green stalk with some different micro tomato varieties. This is a dwarf tomato. It's not a micro dwarf, but it's called the Uluru Okra. And it looks very similar to the Thorburns terracotta. So I'm gonna give this one a try and see how it works. It's supposed to be a smaller, more compact plant, and it's got those earth tones to it that are just so beautiful on the outside. But if it's anything like the Thorburns terracotta flavor, I will be a happy camper. And then the last tomato I can't live without, that's a larger slicing tomato, is the Thorburns terracotta. It is an orange tomato. It's so sweet. It's so delicious. I don't really know how to describe it other than like this really rich, full, sweet, tomatoey flavor. It's just amazing. So if you've never tried Thorburns Terracotta, 100% give it a try. And a couple of other smaller varieties of tomatoes that I'm going to put in the green stock are the Tidy Treats. I grew this one last year from Johnny's, and it was super productive and very small plants. I was really impressed by this one, so I'll grow this one for a red micro tomato. And then there's the Orange Hat tomato from Baker Creek. It's just such an adorable little plant, such a small size, but I love orange tomatoes, so I'm going to kind of see how this one compares to the Sun Gold in flavor. And then Patio Choice Yellow. This is just another cherry tomato that's a micro dwarf, and I think it looks like it's going to be really good. It's a 2017 All-America Selections Award winner, and it should be a good one. And another that I'm going to grow just because I got it as a free gift from Baker Creek this year is the Sweetheart Cherry Tomato. These are adorable. They look like little heart shapes or strawberry shapes. I've really never seen anything like them. And it says they have a rich berry-like flavor. So we'll see. And I think that's enough tomatoes to get me by for 2025. I don't know. We'll find out. I'm sure there's more out there I'm forgetting about. Turnips. I like the purple top globe turnip. It's just a standard turnip. But one that I'm trying this year is called the Sheboygan turnip. That's one that I found from MIgardener, I believe, and it just sounded like a good one. So I'm going to give that one a try. And then for watermelon, I love Jubilee watermelon. It gets really large and it's a really sweet, juicy watermelon with a great flavor. Crimson Sweet is a really good standard variety of watermelon that always produces well and seems to be a really, really standard variety that always does well for us. Also, I want to mention some of the culinary herbs and the tea plants that I like to grow and some new ones that I'm trying this year. I absolutely love growing basil, all different types of basil for cooking and for tea. I love growing any purple basil, surprise, surprise, but any purple basil. There's a dark opal basil. There's one that's called Red Reuben, I think. And there's a purple Ruffles basil, and any of those purple basils I really love to grow. If you choose to grow them, don't be surprised if some of them have more of the dark purple color and some of them have more green and some of them have a green mixed with kind of splotchy purple. They're never really always truly a deep dark purple. You have to start a lot of seeds to pick out the plants that are those super dark purples. I also like growing a mammoth leaf basil. It's just a big, frilly, lettuce-like leafed basil. It's really fun to chop up and put into salads or on wraps. Dwarf Greek globe basil. This one I love because of its growth habit. It makes these perfect little spheres, little hedges of little tiny basil leaves. They're just really beautiful plants and they're really easy to pick and use in cooking because they're so small. They're easier to just kind of pick and throw them into a dish. And they're also fun to use as tea. They make a really good flavor for basil tea. Then there's Thai basil. I like to grow Thai basil and use it in curries. There is holy basil or tulsi, and that one makes a really delicious tea and a really unique flavor. It smells amazing in the garden. It's just a really nice plant. And I also love growing cinnamon basil, lemon basil, and lime basil. Those three each make a very unique basil tea that I really have found that I enjoy. Last year I grew Prospera basil. It's just a series from Johnny's that did really well. It performed well in the high tunnel, and it had these nice compact plants that were just a really good, more Italian Genovese style basil. And this year I found some new basils that I want to try and test out for the flavor. One is called a Coco Mesa. One is called Blue Spice, and this one I thought was really interesting because it had vanilla spice listed in the flavor profile of it. Sounded really yummy. Chinese sweet basil, and then Thai holy caprao basil. I think that's how you say that one. But those all sounded like good ones to try this year. And I'm always open to trying new basils. Also for herbs, I like to grow dill. Mammoth dill is really good. Ducat dill is good. I've never really met a dill that I didn't like. There's one that I'm trying this year that is from Johnny's, and it's called Teddy dill, and it's a more bushy, compact looking plant. So I'm trying it as more of a container variety just to see how it does in a smaller pot and in a smaller space. Cilantro. I love cilantro. The part about cilantro that's sort of sad to me is that cilantro is really good in salsa, and by the time our tomatoes are ready here in Texas, the cilantro has pretty much gone to seed, and it's really harder to get fresh cilantro that's really good and tasty to have along with your tomatoes. So this year I'm going to try the slow bolt cilantro again and see if I can get it to last a little bit longer without bolting. And then there's another called culantro. We're gonna try that one. That's one that Luke from MIgardener, Luke, there's your tail. Luke from MIgardener recommends. And so that one's supposed to be a little bit more heat tolerant and have that cilantro flavor. And then something called popolo, which I hadn't even heard of, but it has a totally different leaf shape than cilantro, but it's supposed to have a similar flavor to cilantro and be really heat tolerant. So I'm gonna give that a try and see how that is in salsas or pico de gallo. I also love to grow chamomile. I started some Zławiecki chamomile. I think that's how you say it. It's a Polish chamomile. I started it years ago and had one or two plants of it out in the garden. And since then, every single year, I have a million chamomile volunteers. If you plant chamomile once, you might just have it forever. But I love fresh chamomile for tea, and I love to dry it and keep it around to continue using it for tea. There's agastache. Agastache is a really fun plant to grow. They have beautiful flowers, and they have such a fragrant, just beautiful presence in the garden. They have a really nice flavor for tea. The one that I have grown in the past is Navajo Sunset, and I've also grown Rose Mint. Both of those kind of had a citrusy, minty sort of scent and flavor to them. Made really delicious tea. And I found one that's new to me this year from Baker Creek, I believe, but it's called Apricot Sprite. And that just sounded like it would be a really yummy tea. So I'm gonna give that one a try. Also for teas, I really love lemon balm and anything that is a mint. So a chocolate mint, orange mint, spearmint, peppermint. And I'm also gonna try apple mint this year. I have some seeds that I found online, and I'm gonna try and grow apple mint from seed, and we'll see how delicious that tea might be. I also like to grow catnip for tea. So the cats are very interested in the catnip, but more importantly, I like to use it as a tea. It has a very calming effect on humans, so kind of the opposite that it does for cats, I guess. But it makes a really yummy tea. I also grow passion flower vine for tea. That plant I didn't grow from seed, but it's definitely a favorite of mine, and it reproduces itself really easily. It will throw seeds all over the place, and you'll have baby passion flower vines popping up everywhere. They're easy to pull, but they volunteer readily. I also love roselle for tea. It's in the mallow family. It's related to okra, so it grows through our hot summers, and then it will start to form the calyxes in the fall, and those are what make this really nice, tangy, hibiscus flavored tea. Mountain mint is a plant that makes a really nice flavored tea, as well as lemongrass. Lemongrass is pretty easy to grow from seed. And calendula I love to grow as a medicinal plant, steep it in oils, and use it for skincare. And some seeds that I've started that I'm adding this year for the medicinals and the tea garden are bee balm or bergamot, also known as monarda. That one makes a really good cut flower. Pollinators love it, and it's supposed to make a really nice tea as well, so I'm going to try that. Moldavian, that one looked like a really interesting one to try to grow, and it was supposed to make good teas, so I'll try that. Stinging nettle, I'm going to add that one back this year. I never used it for tea. I just thought it was a really interesting medicinal plant, but it's supposed to make a good tea as well. Anise, fennel, chicory, and I'm going to grow that and try to harvest some of the roots for medicinal purposes and for tea. And hyssop, and a couple more. One is called Self Heal. That one sounded like a really interesting medicinal plant to have on hand and to try. And feverfew. And last but not least, a few companion flowers that I like to grow for the vegetable garden. Nasturtium. I typically always have nasturtium in my garden, and I'll grow the Alaska mix, which is more of a bushing type nasturtium. This year, I really wanted to find a trailing nasturtium. I've always grown nasturtiums that are bush type nasturtiums, but I really wanted to find a kind of vining and trailing nasturtium. This year I found the Purple Emperor. I think that one came from Baker Creek, but it looked like a really beautiful colored nasturtium, and I thought it might be fun to have it in some of the garden beds as well as in the green stalk, have it kind of trailing and pouring out the green stalk. I also love to grow borage. I've typically just grown the blue borage for especially the pollinators. The bees love borage, but this year I'm going to try a white borage just for fun. Also alyssum, and this year I'm going to try a different marigold. It's called Lemon Star Marigold. It's a little more dwarf, and the flowers have a really cool kind of star shape to them. They're a little bit different looking. So I'll probably still have some French marigolds around also, but we'll try the Lemon Star Marigold this year. So I think that covers all the varieties of seeds. There may be more that I add along the way, but that's just kind of how it goes, isn't it? I wish you joy, and I'll see you next time.